Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's Self-Made Super Fund Club client mentoring webinar. One thing that I'm passionate about, above and beyond providing an education for our client base, is the person that is arguably the #1 investor of all time, who is Warren Buffett. Now, that is no secret. I think in Australia, if not the best part of the world, I am the biggest fan of the gentleman. I'll go through why I'm such a fan throughout tonight's presentation. Generally, the SMSF Club brings to our client base a broad spectrum of investment experts, self-managed super fund specialists, accountants, lawyers, to provide education about everything that's relating to a self-managed super fund. In the past few months, we've had the guys turn up from On Market who talked about investing in IPOs. If you have missed that, log into the online mentoring library, which you all have access to as clients, and you can view all of the past webinars that we've put on. So it's a good one to watch on IPOs. Another one more recently we did on exchange traded funds. We've done on commodities in the past when it comes to investing. Now, out of all those asset classes, like for me as an individual, I haven't invested in precious metals directly using the Metal Desk platform that we created with the guys from Bullion Capital. Me as an individual, I haven't invested in exchange traded funds. I do invest in IPOs though, to a smaller extent. So while I'm not really that big in IPOs anymore, I don't invest in exchange traded funds or even commodities. The company of the SMSF Club isn't to give you an education about only those investments that I believe are suitable to my circumstances. It's to give you a buffet of investment alternatives, an education about all of those specifically, as well as the ability to trade them quite easily inside your self-managed super fund. That is the aim of the SMSF Club. You as a trustee need to take on that education, and then after you do more due diligence post the hour webinar that we run every month, you choose investments that are suitable to your investment circumstances. After all, the sole purpose of a self-managed super fund is for you to control the investment decisions, and hopefully with an education you can make smarter, more informed investment decisions than you'd otherwise have with that level of education. And that's the main purpose that differentiates the SMSF Club, I believe, from every other self-managed super fund provider in the marketplace. Back to Warren Buffett and my belief in him as an investor. So while I don't invest in ETFs, I don't invest in precious metals, the person that I have invested and looked at replicated as an investment advisor is Warren Buffett himself. Before we get into the details about Warren Buffett, and more specifically how you can gain exposure to Berkshire Hathaway, his holding company, we need to go through a few things for housekeeping. The first one is that I've put together this presentation on behalf of the SMSF Club. The SMSF Club, I'm the managing director and an authorised representative of. The SMSF Club is a corporate authorised rep of our licensee, which is RM Capital. RM Capital is the holder of an Australian financial services licence. This presentation is what's referred to as general advice. That is, I haven't taken into consideration your personal investment circumstances when I've put together this presentation. Past performance is not necessarily indicative of future results. There's no guarantees that even a company like Berkshire Hathaway that has over the last 52 years provided an average return above 20%. Despite that, that's no guarantee that those returns are going to be replicated. So I'm going to go through a case study. I'm going to go through some assumptions if we're going through some forward projections. I'll go through everything I believe you need to know to make an informed decision as to whether or not gaining exposure to Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway is an option for you guys as trustees. But as a trustee, it's ultimately your decision. So Warren Buffett, who is the man? Born in August 1930. He was born to a stockbroker who later became a politician, his dad, and he started in his first job at the age of 7, where he ran a newspaper run. he now owns that news company, Washington Post. He went to university, came out of university, started working as a stockbroker, then went from Wall Street back to Omaha, which was his hometown. In 1965, he took over Berkshire Hathaway. He purchased Berkshire Hathaway, which at the time was a textiles company. He soon realized that the textile business wasn't a very profitable one, so he wound up the textile company and created Berkshire, which is now a holding company of all of the investments that he's taken advantage of since that date. Those investments have been quite large and quite broad across a lot of different sectors. I'll go through those in a moment. Right now, Warren Buffett is the third richest man alive. I believe he was just taken over, knocked off the number 2 spot. Number 1 is, of course, Bill Gates. Bill Gates has been a director of Berkshire Hathaway since the 90s and is a good friend of Warren Buffett. He's now referred to as the Oracle of Omaha. Despite his wealth, which is over $70 billion, he is known for his lack of extravagance, unlike a lot of other billionaires. He's also pledged to give away 99% of his fortune when he passes away to the Bill Gates Foundation. And that's a very key point to the future of Berkshire Hathaway that I'll also talk about. But me as an individual, I just want to share as to how passionate I'm about Warren Buffett and how he's guided me as an individual and also as an investor over the last few years. One of the first books I read on Warren Buffett was the first edition of the WB Way, Warren Buffett. It had such a profound impact on me as an individual. I think I first read this in my teenage years. I actually changed my university degree that I was focusing on and moved into investment management, investment markets. Later on, I think it was in 2005, I wrote my first book. Because the WB Way, this book on the screen, had such a big impact on my life, my book, I decided to call the JB Way. The JB Way, which is basically my version on how you can look at replicating Warren Buffett here in the Australian share market. And many of you are adopting the JB Way with your Australian share purchases, where we buy only a few stocks in the attempt to maximize returns. So if one of those share prices increase significantly, we make big gains because we've got a large component of our investment money exposed to that one company. But generally only having shares in a few separate companies is high risk. Therefore, we buy a put option to reduce those usual risks to eliminate the downside, which is one big key lessons that Warren Buffett adopts, is to always have a margin of safety, always have a safety net just in case you're wrong. Warren Buffett states that you should buy a company even a fool can run, because one day a fool will. This is a photo of my family. There in the middle, my eldest son, I came out and told my wife we're going to call him Warren. My second son we're going to call Buffett, the third one Charlie, and the fourth one Munger. That's the most recent photo of my little tribe. But unfortunately, I didn't quite get the say of my family. Warren, he wasn't called Warren, he was called Jack. Buffett wasn't called Buffett, he was called Brody. Third one, not called Charlie, he's called Harry. And the fourth one isn't called Munger either, his name is Cruz. Got to the extent that it was so bad, we were about to actually just get a dog. I go, well, that's perfect, we'll call him Buffett. And dog's a man's best friend, surely I get a say in how my family is operated, but unfortunately not. I've been overruled for all the key decisions of my family. Anything important in the family household, obviously have a big impact. The dog's not called Buffett, it's called Biscuit. So despite my passion for who Warren is, and in an attempt to replicate his success by naming a few of my kids after Warren and his right-hand man Charlie, my wife has overruled it, and unfortunately none of them are called anything to do with Warren, despite my attempt. So let's look at why I'm so passionate about Warren. It really comes down to returns. Purely and simply, it's the consistent and the stable returns that Warren Buffett has been able to provide to investors since 1965. In fact, Even prior to 1965, he created a fund, and the returns in the lead up to 1965 was nothing short of amazing. What I want to focus on here, this is the front page of the annual shareholders letter that goes to shareholders of Berkshire Hathaway each and every year. If you want a copy, and I suggest every investor gets a copy of this to read at your leisure. It's not a big document. They're generally around 20 to 30 pages long. It's written in layman's terms that mum and dad investors hope to understand. Warren Buffett is very good at articulating complex issues into easy to understand simple terms. Don't just get the last year, download every one of them since 1965. And I think if you combine that, that would be the best investment book you can ever read, the combination of all of those. Won't take too long. If you need a copy, then by all means, send me an email, and I'm happy to look at sending you those documents. On the front page, what Warren Buffett actually outlines of this annual shareholders letter is the return in Berkshire Hathaway every year since he took over the helm. And he measures it as the per share book value of Berkshire Hathaway. That is basically the summation of parts. So I want you to focus on is this first column here. Now if we look at the first column there, we can see that the increase per year has been solid. But let's not look at the increase, because when we're looking at making investments, it's not just the returns that we need to look at, we also have to consider risk. Over the last 52 years, if we look down that column, 23% gain, 20% gain, let's go down and look at the years that the book value has actually declined in value. So we go down since 1965. The first one we come to is here, which is in 2001, in a response to September 11th, or the technology correction. It's more to do with the former rather than the latter, because Buffett didn't believe in technology companies until they became more of a manufacturer with consistent earnings. He's made large investments in IBM and Apple over the last few years. If we continue going down, analysing the years that it's declined, there we go. There we've got another one in 2008 as a result of the GFC, which is 9.6%, and there's been none ever since. So when we look at the downside risk over 52 years, there's only been two where the value of the book value of Berkshire Hathaway has declined. Let's have a look at some of the years that has actually increased in value. So let's have a look, 23%, 20, 11, 19, 16, 21, 21, 59, 31, 24, 35%. Wow, that's an extraordinary period. 40%, 31%, 48%, 44%, 48%. More recently, 19, 13, 14, 18%, 10.7. So despite the downside risk being minimal, only 2 years in 52 years, generally we're told that risk is correlated to return. But only 2 years that it's declined in value, when we analyse the return on the upside, we're experiencing very high growth. Like 59% is phenomenal in a year, 35, 40%. Anything above 10% in the last 8 years has been well and truly above most other asset classes or investment managers. So if we look at the book value, that's one measure which Warren Buffett uses as his yardstick. But if we actually look at the actual share price, the share price is a little bit more volatile. So we go through the share price, down 3.4, 4.6%, down 48%, which is phenomenal given the increase in the book value, which shows that markets aren't always rational. In the 70s, we had the oil crisis, and because of that, global markets fell. Despite Berkshire Hathaway having very little, if not no, exposure to oil, the share price pretty much halved. Here, though, well, in 1977, as a response, the market rallied 129% for Berkshire, 102%, 69, right? So more recently, in September 11, sorry, not September 11, the GFC, the market fell, the Berkshire Hathaway share price fell 31%. In 2015, it fell 12.5%. So what we can see there is to analyze book value, which is the summation of parts, the value of a company. Then we have the actual market price, and they're not always the same. We make a distinction that that's a big difference. The share price is dictated on the short term by irrational behavior of short-term investors. Over the long term, though, book value is the only true value of the company, which is why in the 70s we saw the share price rally strongly after it had that correction, as people realized, well, hang on a minute, Berkshire isn't exposed to the big risks that they feared in the 74 oil crisis. So that's a bit about the report and their consistent returns. Overall, if you look at this slide, what we want to take out of it is that Berkshire Hathaway offers high growth potential. Not just back in the 60s, but more recently, over the last decade, it's provided double-digit growth on average over the last 10 years. This is the actual share price chart. This is a share price chart since 1990. If we go back to 1990, it was about $1,000 a share. For one share, $1,000 bucks. A lot of people thought it's not going to go above $1,000. No share's ever gone above $1,000. Those people were soon proved wrong. In the mid-90s, it went through $10,000 a share. 94, 95, it went through $20,000 a share. All the way up until, 2006, people said there's no way Berkshire's going to go through $100,000. Yet it did. Now, over the last, since the age of 14, when I was introduced to the share market by my mum, I've been studying Warren Buffett. For the first decade of my professional career, I looked at trying to replicate him. Right, about 10 years ago, or 2009, I sort of sat back and said, you know what? If you want to become wealthy, you just need to mirror those people that have already been experts at what you want to achieve. If you want to become wealthy, you look at Bill Gates. Right? Bill Gates, it's very hard to replicate him unless you come out with the next best thing that has the biggest impact on society like Microsoft has. Right? If we look at Steve Jobs, very hard to replicate Steve Jobs when he came out with Apple. So unless you've got a business idea that's going to change the world dramatically, it's hard to replicate those experts, therefore to receive the same sort of results that they achieved. When it comes to investing though, Warren Buffett, it's very easy to get Warren Buffett returns. And in 2009, I sort of sat back and said, you know what, you don't need to try to replicate them. As an investment manager, I don't need to try to replicate him. If you want Warren Buffett-like returns, simply invest where he has the majority of his wealth, where he's in control of the investment decisions. If you want access to the same deals that Warren Buffett gets, simply buy Berkshire Hathaway shares. Now, we came out with the first investment linked to Berkshire Hathaway in 2009, which I created, which is the first time we overlaid capital protection and leverage, which is my expertise, with Warren Buffett's company. Many people describe it as doing a Warren Buffett on Buffett himself. It was the first time that it was done in the world. And it was written about in newspapers. We got a fair amount of media publicity, which was great. But a lot of people came out and said there's no way. It was about $90,000. Sydney Morning Herald came out and said there's no way that Berkshire Hathaway is going to go through $100,000 a share. They called it the miserable Berkshire Hathaway investment. Yet, 3 years on, it was trading at $150,000 a share. Many people then said there's no way it's going to go through $150,000. Right now, it's at $250,000 just for one share, making it the most valuable company in the world per share. But when we actually analyze what the value of the company is, when we add up all the shares times it by their share price, it's not the biggest company in the world. It's in fact the fourth largest company in the world, behind Apple, behind Amazon, behind Microsoft, before ExxonMobil. It's the fourth largest company in the world. So if we look at that chart, every time someone said that the market is overvalued for Berkshire Hathaway, they've soon been proved wrong. Anyone that thought the share price was expensive has soon been proved wrong. For me, I think Berkshire Hathaway, the A-class shares, could easily get to $500,000 a share in the future. Now, I don't have a crystal ball to tell me the time frame around that, but history has shown me that the company of a stable and high growth portfolio of companies has got the capacity to grow well and truly into the future, despite what happens to the people that are in control of allocating capital at Berkshire Hathaway, whether that be Warren Buffett or Charlie Munger. The average annual share price return of Berkshire Hathaway over the last 52 years has been 20.8%. Let's have a look at how that compares to the United States share market. If you invested $1 back in 1950 in Warren Buffett, that would be worth over $1 million today. If you invested $1 in the United States share market, which is one of the best performing asset classes in the world over the long term in the last 10 years, it'd be worth less than $1,000. So the share market, which goes up on average 10% a year over the last 50 years, the US share market, 10% a year, people go, yeah, it's pretty good. Property, about 10% a year over the last 50 years, right? So similar growth. Warren Buffett has achieved consistently double the amount of return. What that has an effect on the dollar return because of the benefit of compound interest is that it's not worth $1,000 over that period. It's worth over $1 million. Compound interest is one of the most powerful investment concepts there is. The only problem is that it takes time. And when it comes to super, most of you have a lot of time before you're going to need it. So Berkshire Hathaway is a company, as I said, it's the fourth largest company in the world. The CEO, chairman, is Warren Buffett and the largest shareholder. While Berkshire Hathaway, since he closed down the textile mills decades ago, it does nothing in its own right. Berkshire Hathaway employs less than 30 people. And most of them are to fend off calls that Berkshire Hathaway receives every day from people like me. Call them up. Hi, Trudy. Justin here from Australia. Can I talk to Warren? Trudy says no. How's the weather? We have a chat. Hangs up. Talk to you tomorrow, Trudy. Yet to get through on the phone. So Berkshire Hathaway doesn't do anything in its own right except for invest. Some of the biggest companies that Warren Buffett owns is Geico Insurance. If you go in the United States, watch an ad, there's a gecko, the green gecko, that is Geico Insurance. Berkshire Hathaway owns 100% of Geico Insurance. Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railway, the transport company, 100% owned by Warren Buffett. American Express, largest shareholder, Berkshire Hathaway. NetJets, 100% shareholder, Berkshire Hathaway. IBM, largest shareholder, Berkshire Hathaway. Kraft Heinz, Coca-Cola, largest shareholder, Berkshire Hathaway. Goldman Sachs, one of the largest shareholders, Berkshire Hathaway. Wells Fargo, the biggest retail bank in America. General Motors, Bank of America, Apple. Right, these are some of the largest brands in the world that Berkshire Hathaway holds either the largest shares in the company or owns the company entirely. How Warren Buffett has been able to acquire such big brands is that American Express he bought back in the 60s. After the share price had a big fall, he was able to buy a lot of stock at a really cheap price and he's held it for decades. He waits for the market to fall, so his belief is he looks at market fluctuations as your friend rather than your enemy. He profits from folly rather than participate in it. The Goldman Sachs deal was arguably the best deal that has occurred in modern day. In the GFC, when the United States Federal Reserve questioned the banks and their capital requirements, they came out when Lehman Brothers went broke on a Thursday. They came out on Friday and gave an ultimatum to all of the American banks is that you're either got to raise capital, merge, or suffer the fate that Lehman's did. So on Friday, Warren Buffett receives a phone call from Goldman Sachs and said, hey, we need $5 billion. Warren Buffett says, that's great, I've got cash. He leaves a big cash pile for when the market or the tide goes out because he knows people will be swimming naked. When there's quality companies that have too much debt on their balance sheet because of directors that pursue growth at all costs, eventually when the tide does go out, they're going to need capital. And when they need capital, Warren Buffett's going to negotiate very attractive terms to buy quality, outstanding companies when those companies' directors are on their knees. So when Warren receives a phone call from a company like Goldman Sachs, at a time like the global financial crisis, he realizes that he's in a very powerful negotiating position. And that's when Warren Buffett steps up and negotiates hard. At the time when the United States interest rate was pretty much zero, he turned up and said, I'm not buying ordinary shares. What I'm going to do is I'm going to buy preference shares. What preference shares are is, rather than being a normal shareholder, is effectively you're lending the company money. So he lent Goldman Sachs $5 billion. To lend them $5 billion, they had to pay Warren Buffett 10% in interest a year. At a time when interest rates was effectively zero, Warren Buffett negotiated 10%. At the end of the 5-year term of the loan, he also negotiated that he could convert those $5 billion worth of preference shares to shares in Goldman Sachs at the price that they were at the GFC. So effectively, he received all of the upside of the Goldman Sachs share price, none of the downside risk, provided the company didn't go broke, and he was paid 10% a year. They're sort of deals that I would like to be exposed to. Unfortunately, in the GFC, I didn't have $5 billion, so Goldman Sachs didn't give me a call. But for me to participate in that deal, all that I had to do was own Berkshire Hathaway shares. 2 years later, in 2011, Bank of America called up Warren and said, hey, we need $5 billion too. Warren Buffett said, that's great. Cross out Goldman Sachs' name. Here's the term sheet. I'm buying preference shares, and he replicated it then. And that's basically how Warren Buffett goes about his investments. He has a lot of cash. He sits on a huge amount of cash. The Berkshire Hathaway cash pile right now is going to be close to $100 billion. He's sitting on cash. So when something falls, he's going to be able to act decisively and make smart investment decisions, like he did through the GFC. So we go back to 2009. As a result of the GFC, you got that Goldman Sachs deal. Burlington Northern Santa Fe, he already owned 23%. He acquired the other 77%. That's the railway company. He paid $26 billion for it. Lubrizol, he bought for just under $10 billion. Then in 2011, he got the Bank of America deal, another $5 billion worth of stock. Later on that year, he invested over $10 billion in IBM. He acquired 50% of Heinz. He then orchestrated the Kraft-Heinz merger, which was a $46 billion investment. Largest ever acquisition, Precision Cast Parts, $37 billion. Made his first investment in Australia, investing in IAG, the insurance company, Insurance Australia Group. Insurance Australia Group, not just because Warren Buffett bought into it, but I've come to understand a bit more about insurance companies. I believe is one of the top 3 picks here in the Australian share market, even above $6 a share. One thing that Warren Buffett has learned, and he learned it very early on, is at the AGM in 2015, 2 years ago, which I attended, he was asked by an audience member what's his greatest investment advice he's ever received. And Warren Buffett said was to understand the insurance company. The second question that he received was, well, what's his second best of investment advice? He goes, well, I just told you, it's to understand an insurance company. So what Warren Buffett understands very, very well is that when you own an insurance company, it's not just a matter of underwriting or receiving a premium. What you have to do as an insurance company is hold a huge amount of money in liquid assets just to pay out any claims that might occur. What Warren Buffett has done an outstanding job with is invest what that is referred to as the float. He invests that float in other companies that creates revenue, therefore, and capital growth, therefore benefiting the Berkshire Hathaway shareholders. That is basically the secret sauce of how Warren Buffett has become so wealthy. The starting focus was an insurance company and investing that float. Thereon, it's been allocating the income that he's received from those investments to buy further companies of outstanding quality, but only when those companies are trading at a huge discount. And generally, he buys it with a safety net, like the Goldman Sachs deal, where he doesn't take the downside risk of the share price falling. He gets the upside, but not the downside risk, similar to the JB way. Bets on oil, so it's not just in share investments. The oil price back 12 months ago, 18 months ago now, fell to around $30 a barrel. At that time, he realized that, look, oil can't sustain those sort of levels. It's cheap. So he waits for outstanding opportunities of assets when they're trading below what he believes is fair value. When oil fell, he made a large investment in Phillips 66. Then he's invested in Apple over the last few years, which has been more about the decisions of Todd Coombs, who's one of the people that are now in charge of allocating some of that capital rather than just Warren or Charlie. So as you can see there, there's a lot of global brands. They are big acquisitions. He doesn't just sit back making small bite-sized investments. He waits for outstanding opportunities, and when those opportunities come around, he has a big swing. He can generally afford to have a big swing because he's got a safety net just to mitigate the downside risk. That is the secret of Warren Buffett. And it's not just me that is a fan. In the globe, 50,000 people travel all across the world to congregate in Omaha for his annual shareholders conference. Now here in Australia we have CBA, BHP, some of the largest companies in the country. They hold an AGM and around 20 people turn up, and those 20 people are generally there for the free tea and bickies in the back of the room. And it goes for not very long at all. Berkshire, 50,000 people turn up, and it runs for 3 days, often referred to the Woodstock for capitalists. To Omaha in the middle of nowhere, it's a big effort, a long time to get there, especially from Australia. And a lot of people, not just myself, go from Australia just to attend, to listen to the most successful investors of all time for 3 days, being Warren and Charlie, who sit there for a full day answering questions from shareholders. It's such a good event to attend. Bill Gates is there for the full 3 days, and I'll go through why he's there in a moment. To get a seat in the auditorium, you have to line up at about 5 a.m. That was at 5 a.m., 3 hours before the doors opened. If you arrived a little bit later, like 5 minutes later, you would have been watching it via video in the convention center next door. So what I took away from the conference, I suppose some lessons that I've taken away from the conference in 2013, 2015. I'm actually going to be attending in the first week of May again this year with a few of my colleagues. The first thing that I can share with you is that the essence of Warren Buffett, the essence of why Berkshire Hathaway has been so successful, is that they keep it very simple. It's not complex. They don't use complex financial instruments. They buy just shares in the company and they hold it for a long period of time. They don't stuff it up early. This is Warren Buffett's company. It operates off half a floor in that building. It's not even the tallest building in Omaha. It's a very simple, down-to-earth office. There's half my team that travelled to Omaha with me. This is his house. He bought in the 60s. He paid 165 grand, I think it was, for it at the time, and it's worth about $500,000 today. For a person that's worth, what, $70-odd billion, to have such a modest house puts him as one of the odd few in the world. He says it's warm in winter, it's cool in summer. What else would you like? He lives a very basic lifestyle. Stick to what you know, what you're passionate about. Number two, what Warren Buffett is an expert at is investing. So you stick to what you know, then outsource the rest to industry experts. Here, domestically, yes, I invest in the Australian share market by the JB way. A large portion of my wealth that's managed that way. That is my expertise. That's what I know. I know a little bit more about super as well, self-managed super funds, but I've more outsourced that to other industry experts and employed them to help me make decisions, not just for my self-managed super fund, but also you guys as clients to gain access to. And my core expertise is investing here domestically by the JB way. I want to gain exposure to commodities. I've teamed up with Jim Rogers. If I want to gain exposure to international investing, there's none better than Warren Buffett. That's what I do as an investor. That's what I give access to my clients to. That's what I'm passionate about. I enjoy what I do. Keep smiling. Warren Buffett's the same. There he is on the right. He does a fun run ever since he bought Brooks, the sand shoe company. He's had a fun run which occurs on the Sunday. It's a bit of a fun day. There he is handing out the medals on the right. On the left, there he is again with Bill Gates playing ping pong. It's just a casual day. That's what they do. After ping pong, they go play bridge with shareholders like myself. There he is. Next to the conference, there is a convention where they sell basically every company that he owns shares in, and they're selling as much shit as they can to shareholders. Shareholders receive a 7% discount. We've got Coca-Cola in the background. He's got his Clayton Homes, which is one of the largest manufacturers of homes in the United States. They build a house in the corner while the conference is on. So every company, Justin's Boots, it owns a cowboy boots company. They sell the most amount of cowboy boots that they do throughout the year there on that weekend. Leverage. Leverage is an interesting comment that Warren Buffett and Charlie mentioned. They talked about leverage and they discussed it at length. They sort of had a bit of a debate where they agreed that had they leveraged their portfolio, their returns would have been far, far superior than the great returns they received. However, the reason that they didn't incorporate leverage was that their comments, we do not like to sweat at night, which is interesting. One, their returns would have been far greater had they implemented leverage, right? That's an important take home. Leverage is very powerful in that it magnifies the returns when the underlying asset that you're investing in increases in value. However, generally, if you incorporate leverage and the underlying asset falls in value, the losses are also magnified. That's where he's referring to, like, we're happy with the growth of leverage, but we're not comfortable with the downside risk because it's impacting on our sleep at night. So it depends on you as an individual. Leverage would have been far superior than what they would have achieved, even though they achieved stellar results. So maybe leverage could be right for you. It depends on your comfort factor with the downside risk of leverage, being how it magnifies the losses when you're wrong. Fifth one, they're no bullshit billionaires. It's easy to not worry about what other people think when you're in your 80s. They're straight shooters. They answer questions without considering how it's going to impact people's view of them as individuals. Because simply they don't care. They want to answer questions directly. Charlie Munger can answer any question with 4 words. He's very smart, astute, despite being in his 90s. There they are, talking about no bullshit investors. There's Warren at the lower part of that screen and Bill Gates opposite him with their families. I took that photo. We were lucky enough to be sitting 2 tables across from them. We're sitting down and they asked me what I'd like to order in this restaurant, and I ordered what Warren Buffett's eating. So I got a steak, chips, a Coke, and a side salad, which was more lettuce and blue cheese. And this is how he eats, right? The steak, I thought, was tough. It wasn't a good steak. The salad was atrocious, right? And drinking a Coke, it could be a lot better. For dessert, there they are having Coke spiders, right? But that's how Warren Buffett chooses to live his life. He's got family near him and around him. Who needs anything else? Who needs to make life more complicated by adding issues, whether it be toys or anything like that? And Bill Gates is becoming more and more similar to Warren Buffett the longer they spend time together. Cash is king. When the tide goes out and everyone's swimming naked, you want to make sure you've got your togs on and you've got plenty of cash to take advantage of great companies when they're on their knees. Buffett and Charlie are often wrong. Despite their strong success, in the short term, they have often got it wrong. So there's no secret sauce to getting it right every time that you invest. You should be prepared to make a bad decision, because despite all of the information that you've got, things can change. And with the share market, investing, even property market, we're right now faced with a huge amount of uncertainty with APRA, ASIC, looking at changing the lending criteria for people buying property. That could have a big impact on property investors. So you've got to be prepared for being wrong. And when you're wrong, you've got to have a safety net and an alternative. For most people, just buy quality investments and hold for the long term. And that's what super is all about. Buy quality and hold for the long term. Don't stuff it up early. Fund managers are not paid to make you money. It's interesting, the fund management market, they're paid to basically invest and allocate your capital. This is why I choose Warren Buffett. Right? Warren Buffett's sole purpose is to increase the book value of Berkshire Hathaway above that of the index, quite simply. You pick people whose profits and revenue is aligned to the performance of investors. not people that just get paid for poor performance, where a lot of financial planners and fund managers do exactly that here in Australia and around the globe. Who will take over? The big question. This is the most common question I've received the last 10 years, and Warren Buffett's received it since 1965. Well, not quite 1965, but when he turned 65, people said, you're going to retire. You got all this money, it's time to put your feet up, buy a boat, and go fishing. Warren Buffett goes, well, that's not my plan. He did name a bloke. He did name a bloke in when he was 65. He said, this bloke's going to take over when I decide to retire or if I pass away. He made it public. Unfortunately for the bloke that was named, 3 years later, he died. It's always good when you outlive your successor. So he was a bit sheepish then. He goes, look, I've got no intention to resign, so why do we need to talk about someone who's going to take over? Because by the time it comes about, it's probably not going to be the person I named today. Well, in 2007, thereabouts, he came out and announced that the person that's likely to be his successor is the guy that was running his insurance company, a guy by the name of David Sokol. He'll take over the majority of the decision making when Warren decides to move on or passes away. In 2011, David Sokol was charged with insider trading and I believe is still in jail as a result. Lubrizol, which is one of the deals Berkshire Hathaway took over, 2 weeks prior to introducing Buffett to the deal, David Sokol bought shares on his personal account. So he's charged for insider trading, front-running Berkshire Hathaway, which is the company they got responsible for. So he's not coming out too quickly and saying, you know what, when I decide to retire or when I pass away, this person is going to take over. But reassured that there is a name in an envelope. He does have a plan. It's not as if there's no plan intact. Now, I probably think it's going to happen sooner rather than later, and it's not going to be on Warren Buffett's terms. I think it's going to be when Charlie decides to retire, Charlie Munger. I believe when Charlie decides to retire or passes away, Warren will also step aside. But we are in good hands. We have there the right Warren Buffett, the middle is Charlie Munger, and on the left we have Bill Gates. The right and the middle is the past and the present. The one on the left, I believe, is the future. I believe Bill Gates will take over as the chairman of Berkshire Hathaway. He's been groomed as a director of the company for the last 2 decades. When I went to the AGM in 2012, the person that spent all of the time next to Warren Buffett's right shoulder was Bill Gates. When I went there in 2015, the person that did not leave his shadow for the entire three days is Bill Gates. He's been groomed to take over. What I also believe he's going to take over is that indirectly he inherits through his charity Warren Buffett's stake in Berkshire Hathaway, or the majority of it. So Bill Gates indirectly becomes the biggest shareholder of Berkshire Hathaway. What I believe he's going to do to the company when he takes over is that he'll change it from a capital growth company to an income paying stock. I believe that when you run a charity and you inherit $60 billion worth of shares, unless it's paying a dividend, you cannot implement any form of change to society. Bill Gates has been long believer in coming up with a cure of polio, and he's almost achieved that. He has a lot of things that he wants to do with the income that comes from the Bill Gates charity, Bill Gates Foundation, to distribute to create change, whether it's in research and development for polio or feeding starving kids in Africa, whatever his goal is through the foundation. The only way he can distribute that income and make an impact on society is if Berkshire Hathaway pays out its dividends. Now, why I believe that's going to happen is that all that Charlie and Warren do is allocate capital. Like the future profit of the company has nothing to do with these two people. The income of the company has nothing to do with Warren or Charlie. Like if they pass away, Coca-Cola is still going to sell just as much Coke and water and Fanta soft drink that it ever has previously. Those profits are going to go through to Berkshire Hathaway. American Express is going to make just as much money as it did previously, whether Warren and Charlie are alive or not. Right. So those companies that are running are completely segregated from Berkshire Hathaway. They pay a distribution that goes to Berkshire. Right. What Warren and Charlie have done well is when that income comes through, they haven't paid dividends. They've invested that capital. Because they're no longer there to invest for future growth, Bill Gates, I believe, will distribute the majority of that as income to Berkshire Hathaway shareholders. By distributing it to Berkshire Hathaway, his charity, which is the largest shareholder, would be able to go through and fund the key things that it wants to do for society. When it goes to being an income producing stock, I believe the share price could be re-rated massively on the upside. Right now, I believe the share price has been suppressed as a result of the uncertainty as to what's going to happen post Warren and Charlie. A lot of people that have held the stock for a long time said, I don't want to take the risk of when these guys pass away, the share price falling, so they've sold their stock already. A lot of people that are considering investing have sat on the sideline saying, oh, wait until they pass away because they're getting close to it. Like they're 87 and 92 years of age. They're getting closer to it. So while 10 years ago, when I first came out with investment, or 8 years ago, a lot of people sat on the sidelines. They missed out on huge gains by doing nothing. Why I'm coming out with this investment now is that I believe in the next 3 years, thereabouts, that there could be a change of the outlook of Berkshire Hathaway. And Bill Gates will take over and we'll get that massive uplift in the Berkshire Hathaway share price. That's my belief. As the uncertainty and the stock overhang gets eroded from the market, the share price should also increase. So the future. What Warren Buffett does when he analyzes buying into a company must have quality management. 2, has to have a long-term track record of providing superior returns to investors. 3, it has to be a simple and easy to understand business model. And 4, it's got to be trading below intrinsic value. They're the 4 main criteria that Buffett looks for any purchase that it's going to acquire. For me, the company that meets those 4 key characteristics that Buffett looks at is Berkshire Hathaway itself. Quality management. It's got a 52-year track record of providing over 20% share price appreciation on average annually since 1965. It's simple and easy to understand business model. It is merely an investment company. It employs less than 30 people, yet it's the 4th largest company in the world. And I believe it's trading below intrinsic value simply because of the uncertainty that surrounds the age of the CEO and key decision maker being Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. Therefore, I believe the best company that meets all of that criteria is Berkshire Hathaway. Because of that, we've come out with an investment, which is the 3rd series that I've issued under Tailored Investment Solutions, which is linked to Berkshire Hathaway stock. What we do within Tailored Investment Solutions is overlay my expertise, which is capital protection and leverage, to an underlying asset that has the capacity to go up significantly. Today, that underlying asset that I believe represents the highest upside profit potential over the next 3 years is Berkshire. Another reason why I believe it offers the highest growth is that over the last few months, we've had a big change in the decision maker in the United States. We have what people refer to as the Trump effect. Now, Donald Trump, despite your political view, has come out with a key message to the globe. That is that he is the most powerful man in the world, is only considered about one economy and one economy alone, and that is the American economy. Even if he is able to get a fraction of his policies through government, that's going to have a huge uplift on the US economy. If you want exposure to the Trump effect, the best way you can do it is through Berkshire Hathaway. It is the true American globalized company with its investment in American Express, Goldman Sachs, being across banking, insurance with Geico, to retail, to transport, to even oil. It's got the most diversified spread of the American economy that you can gain exposure through one stock. So look, my value is transparency, innovation, and integrity. How I make money from this investment is a performance fee. I make 10% of any performance. So any amount you get paid, I get 10% of. I'm aligning my interest with that of you guys as investors. As I said before, you should only invest in investment managers where their profits and revenue is aligned to the performance that they generate. Over the last, even though this is the 3rd one under Tailored Investment Solutions, my previous company came out with a lot of issues that I created back there. The first issue of the Berkshire Hathaway investment, which is a very similar structure to what we have today, it took part in April 2010. That was the commencement. It was a 3-year term, same payout, same structure as what we've got for Tailored Investment Solutions. Over that 3 years, the Berkshire Hathaway share price went up by 29.68%. The investment returns for our fund made 63%. The reason for that outperformance above Berkshire Hathaway is simply because of the leverage that's built into the investment. Leverage has magnified the returns because the underlying asset has increased in value. In July 2010, a few months later, we came out with our second series. 3 years later, the Berkshire Hathaway share price had gone up by 38.92%. The investment return, the cash-on-cash return for the Berkshire investment that I issued was 94%. Again, that return was because of the leverage. Leverage has the capacity to increase returns when the underlying asset goes up. If the underlying asset goes down, so too does the risk. October of 2010 came out with my third series issued to Berkshire. The share price increased by 39%. Our investors received 95%. That was after all fees. January 2011, a few months later, came out with the fourth one. Berkshire share price went up 33%. We made 50% to investors. April 2011, share price went up 47%. We made 109% for investors over that 3-year period. June 2011 series, the Berkshire Hathaway share price went up 67%. The investment returns was 202%. Why it's so much more is simply because of the high amounts of leverage that you get with our investment structure. It really magnifies the returns when the underlying reference asset increases in value, as we can see there when we compare the Berkshire Hathaway share price with the returns that we provided. July 2014, under Tailored Investment Solutions, the share price had gone up 30%, so it hasn't matured yet. It matures in July 2017. The investor returns, had they matured when I put together, had they received the true value of the investment at the date of putting together this presentation, the return would be 65%. In June 2015, which is Series 2 under Tailored Investment Solutions, it matures in just over 12 months. The share price is up 24%. We've made 68% for investors over the last 20 months. So if we look at all of those investments, there's a few things we can take away. Not one has gone down in value. Now, while past performance has been stellar, if we look at our returns, it's significantly outstanding, making it the best investment series that really has come about in the last 10 years. If it's not the best, it's pretty high up there here in Australia, which is something I'm very proud about. So while none has gone down, the average return, if we look at all of them, has been 93% over the 3-year holding period. That assumes the last two is 2.5 years and 18 months. So the average return over the close enough to the 3-year holding period has been 93% of cash-on-cash investor returns, which is phenomenal. So how does the structure work? First, it gives you 100% exposure to Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett's company. That's all we're doing. We're just allocating the capital to Berkshire Hathaway. You gain exposure to the currency movements, but that is only on the gains. Let's say Berkshire Hathaway goes up 10% and the currency moves in our favor by 20%. You don't make 30%, you just make 20% of 10. So you get 12% is your investment returns. If the currency went against us by 20%, you don't get 10, you get 8. Hopefully that makes sense. If there's no return, if it goes down in value, currency has no impact on the investment whatsoever. There's 3 risk management strategies built into the investment. 1 is capital protection. 2 is dollar cost averaging. We dollar cost average on the way in over the first 2 months. There's 3 observation dates, and on the way out over the last 3 months, which reduces the impact of any big movements in the first few months of the investment or the last few months of the investment term. You can borrow the full amount. You can borrow 100% through what's called a limited recourse borrowing arrangement, which means that you can do it not just in your own name, but also your self-managed super fund. The effective interest rate is 4.95%. For us to hedge that full loan amount, there's a currency hedging fee, which is 2%. You borrow the full amount for your self-managed super fund, so you know exactly what your downside risk is up front. You prepay 3 years of all those costs up front. So 3 years of the interest, which is fixed, 3 years of the currency hedging fee. There's not a cent to pay over the 3-year term other than what you outlay up front. That's a maximum amount you can risk. Every quarter you can redeem, but that should be considered merely as a profit-taking mechanism. If you redeem early, there may be break fees, and there's no guarantee that you get any of the amount that you prepay up front back. It is designed to be held for the 3 years, despite giving you the option to sell out or take profits in the interim. There is potential for yearly income distributions, despite Buffett's disbelief in paying out gains. We've structured it where any of the gains up to 10% can be paid out in year 1 and year 2, but there must be gains. If there's no gains, there is 0 coupon, and it's approximately a 3-year term. So as an example, let's say you want to buy 100 grand worth of Berkshire, 100,000 units. So we issue it $1 a unit, not 250 grand a share. So we get $1 a unit, gives you $100,000 exposure to Berkshire. Your outlay is $20,850, which is 3 years of 4.95% interest and 3 years of the currency hedging fee. There's an advisor service fee. That's the fee the SMSF Club charges investors, which covers my legal cost of putting the investment together. It cost me around 200 grand to put the investment together. When we consider lawyers, the arranger, we consider the link, which is the share registry, to manage it on an ongoing basis. So we just, rather than me covering up the cost and taking the risk, we spread it across all investors. Where I make money is through, Taylor Investment Solution makes money is through the performance fee. So the total outlay for the 3 years for $100,000 exposure to Berkshire Hathaway is $23,150. Let's have a look at some scenarios. Let's say Berkshire Hathaway over the next 3 years goes up 50%. If it goes up 50%, your return is $50,000. So it's 50 grand on the 100,000, 50%, 50 grand. You get paid 45, I get paid 5 grand, 10% of that payout. As a result, you'll turn $23,000 into $45,000, right? So you pretty much doubled your money. If the share price goes up 30%, your 100 grand's worth 130,000, you pay off the 100 grand loan, you're left with $30,000 difference. I take 3, you take 27. So you've turned 23 grand into $27,000. Let's say Berkshire Hathaway falls 50%, and it falls 50% immediately and never recovers. Your 100 grand is worth 50,000, but you've got the limited recourse borrowing arrangement. So you walk away from the loan, you walk away from the investment, you lose 23,150. Right, your downside risk is quantified. That's the maximum amount you can lose. Let's say the share price stays the same for 3 years. Not though that's happened for the last 52 years. Let's say it just stayed the same. Because the 23,150 is in interest, the currency hedging fee, the advisor service fee, you would lose the 23,150 if the Berkshire Hathaway share price stays the same. Okay. Of course, you've borrowed that amount. If the underlying asset doesn't increase in value and you borrow the investment amount, that is at risk. So this is an example. Peter and Ann, let's say they've got 250 grand in their super. They've got it invested elsewhere, let's call it property, and in some shares. They like the idea of international diversification. They want exposure to the American economy. They want exposure to Warren Buffett. Right? They decide to invest $23,150, and that gives them $100,000 worth of Berkshire Hathaway. The reason that they like that is that they like how the fees have been reduced by having a self-managed super fund, but also how the fees for the investment are correlated to that of performance. They want to take control of their super. They want exposure to Buffett. They want to know what their downside risk is. We know that the risk is $23,150. They love the idea of leverage, and they believe the only way that they can actually achieve their retirement goals is by increasing the returns that can come about through leverage. They've got a self-managed super fund. They like the fact that it's been tailored for a self-managed super fund, even though that you can take advantage of the limited recourse borrowing arrangement if you invested in your own name. So this investment, a lot of investors do it in their super, and they do it in their own name as well, outside of super. The key risk, look, there's no guarantee that the investment will go up. If the underlying asset, being Berkshire Hathaway, falls in value or stays the same, the investment is going to increase. I cannot generate a return for investors unless the underlying reference asset, being Berkshire Hathaway, goes up. Me as an investor, like you as an investor, should look at investments that have had a long-term track record of providing superior returns to investors. That's why I love shares in general. That's why I love property. That's even more so why I love Berkshire Hathaway. Because despite shares and property providing a great return to investors over the long term, the return from Berkshire Hathaway over the last 52 years has been double that, which compounding makes a big difference at the end, as I mentioned earlier. But if the investments don't go up, your 23,150, if you decide to invest 100,000 units, is at risk. Your return is affected by Berkshire as well as the currency movements, but the currency movements only impact the returns. The counterparty credit risk. This is an investment grade bank that provides the capital protection. What's important is that these guys also provide us the loan. If it's a limited recourse borrowing arrangement and that counterparty goes broke, you just walk away from both. Sure, you lose your outlay. A lot of people go, what's going to happen when they die? Look, I've told you my belief in that Bill Gates will take over. I believe that a lot of people that have been sitting on the sidelines will buy the stock as it becomes an income-paying stock. Now, that's just my belief. I haven't read that. It's just my observation by attending a few of the AGMs. That's what I believe is going to occur. But a lot of people go, oh, when he dies, the share price is going to halve in value. Now, the only comparison that I can make to another company is that of Apple. Apple obviously had a key leader in Steve Jobs, and many people thought that Steve Jobs, when he passes away, the share price will fall. As we can see there, in 2010 to 2011, it only went up fractionally. As people knew he had cancer, people knew that he was going to eventually pass away. Steve Jobs passed away on the 5th of October 2011, and many people thought the share price was going to fall as a result. 12 months later, though, the share price was up 72%. 72%. So even though a lot of people's fears of why they didn't buy the stock eventuated, Steve passing away, and he was clearly a big leader in the innovation of Apple, not just originally, but over the last few decades. While they're fearful that the share price will fall and the company would fall in value, the opposite actually occurred. It increased in value significantly as that uncertainty was removed from the market. Now, I believe something similar would occur if Warren and Charlie decided to retire. If it goes up 72%, if we look at the outlay, if it goes up 72% for Peter and Ann, they got 100 grand, it'll be worth $172,000. So the $23,000 investment, the cash investment would be worth $72,000 less my 10%, so 65 grand. So $23,000 to 65 grand is a phenomenal return. So that's what would occur if the share price replicates what happened to Apple when Steve Jobs passed away. So look, the investment closes. What we do is it's called a closed-end investment. We raise capital now. We go around going, look, do you want to invest? We do webinars, right? Hopefully you got an opportunity to sit down with your advisor to talk about the investment, any key questions you have. But the 11th of April is the deadline. We need your application form by the 11th of April. After that date, we need to borrow the money for the full investors. We need to set the hedge in place, which is the protection. So after that date, you miss out. So you've got a week to consider it. So it closes the 11th of April 2017, which is next week. Now, I'm conscious of time, being such a big fan and passionate about Warren Buffett. I've gone for a little bit longer than what I was planning to. But what I might do is look at the questions to see if anyone had any questions. If you do have questions, by all means, let me know. Someone talking about the mass, yeah, 20,850 plus 2,200 is 23,050, not 23,150. Thank you. I appreciate that, Paul, for outlining that with me. There's three types of people in this world: those that can count and those that can't. So I'll make that adjustment. If we do make that adjustment, you're $100 better off. That is the minimum investment. The minimum investment is 23,150, and that'll give you $100,000 worth of exposure. Great question there. What is the maximum amount? Another good question. There is no maximum amount. We do have an amount that we can look at borrowing and hedge with the hedge counterparty. If we increase above that, there is a chance that we may close the entire investment early. Comment about what is the maximum risk. The maximum risk is $23,050 for 100,000 units. So if you invested $1 million, that would be $230,500. That would be your outlay. That's the maximum risk over the investment term. Because what happens at the end of the year? What is the risk then? So let's say you invest now. So you invest $23,050. If in 12 months' time it's up 10%, assuming the currency doesn't move, you get paid $9,000. If in 12 months later it's up another 10%, you get another $9,000. So what we're doing with paying the coupons out is like harvesting the growth. That reduces the risk that if the third year the share price plummets for whatever reason, you've got $18,000 banked in the bank account, so your risk is a lot less than the full $23,000. When does the date finish? It's going to be in late April 2020. When is the payment due? The money comes out of the bank account in mid-April. I don't know the key dates. Can I repeat the examples of a return of 50% and 30%? Yep. So if the investment goes up 50%, assuming 100,000 units, you will get $45,000, assuming the currency doesn't move at all over the 3-year term. So your $23,050 is worth $45,000. That's not profit. Your $23,000 is your investment, and you get $45,000 back. If it's 30%, your $23,050 is worth $30,000 less my $3,000 performance fee, so you get paid $27,000 at the end of the term, assuming no currency fluctuations. Will this presentation be available? Yes, it is. Like all of our webinars, we put them within the next 24 to 48 hours on our mentoring library. Mentoring library, if you go into the client login on our website, you should have been provided a password. That will get you into our mentoring library. If you don't have your password, simply email admin@thesmsfclub.com.au and they'll send you your password to be able to view all of those. Can I combine SMSF money and personal? Example, $23,000 from super and $10,000 from your personal account. Look, if you're considering investing in your personal name as well, you can't combine them, but what we'll do is look at issuing less than 100,000 units in your personal name. So if you're doing $23,000 in super, you'll take 100,000 units in your self-managed super fund. Then if you're looking at, say, $10,000, it'll work out to be close enough to 50,000 units. So yes, we'd look at allocating that investment across different entities. Look, I'm just conscious of the time. When I hand the coupon to my accountant, how much of the coupon do I declare as income? 100% of that coupon amount should be considered as income. I'm not a tax agent though. There is a tax opinion within the product disclosure statement. So if you pass that over to your accountant should be able to determine how the tax treatment is from the investment. Can we get paid yearly if profits are made? Yes, that's exactly right. So if the share price is up 10%, you get paid $9,000 for that $100,000 example. If it's up 5% though, you only get $4,500. So it's up to 10% that you get paid out as income. If it doesn't go up, you don't get paid anything at all. So yeah, when it is paid, my interpretation is that it is ordinary income in most cases. So look, hopefully you've enjoyed tonight's webinar. I apologise for going 10 minutes over time, but hopefully you gained a fair amount out of the event. With the tax treatment of your self-managed super fund, given we are your SMSF accountant, we know how the tax treatment is, which is one of the main reasons you use us. It's to gain access to SMSF investments that have been specifically designed for SMSFs, and this is one of them. It's not open to investors outside of the SMSF Club. Given that we do your tax treatment, we manage that entire process for you. So it's not as if you need to provide the PDS to your accountant. Your accountant needs to read it to determine what the actual treatment is, and they charge you on a 15-minute block. So it's one of the main reasons that you use us when we're incorporated all under the one roof. It makes it a lot easier for administration. So thanks, guys. If you've got any other questions, please speak to your advisor. Give them a call immediately. For numbers, this is probably the biggest webinar that we've had. So if you want to get in by the 11th, I suggest you make it a priority to contact your advisor to discuss the investment. So thanks very much. I look forward to speaking to you next mentoring webinar, if not in person in the near future. Thanks for tuning in. Happy investing and good night.